Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So thank you for joining today's International Women's Day Tech Talk, accessible development that empowers the developer. So my name is Scott Wilmarth, and I'm the User Experience Strategist for Accessibility, and I'll be introducing our guest speaker shortly. Before we get started, a quick few notes. We are going to have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please add your comments into the thread and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. So I've actually had the opportunity to meet and chat with our special guest a few different times now, and I'm thrilled that she's here to share with us today. She actually comes to us with a vast and varied background that mirrors Cerner's needs. She's worked in graphic design, development, and product management. She has experience with multiple different technologies, working with cross-platform products, SaaS, and ensuring inclusive experiences. She's also a member of the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative Education and Outreach Working Group, so I know that she's going to have a lot of different takeaways for each of us. So Adina is passionate about solving problems with clean code, innovative thinking, and accessibility in mind. So please put your virtual hands together and help me welcome Adina Halter, the Senior Principal Software Architect for Accessibility at Comcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about accessible development and really about empowering you, the developer, to create really dynamic, really accessible solutions. Again, my name is Adina Halter. I am currently Senior Principal Software Architect for Accessibility at Comcast NBC Universal. In my position, I engineer innovative and aspirational science solutions for our customers with disabilities. Prior to this position, I was at Comcast in another position doing product management, ensuring that all of our products were accessible to people with disabilities. So I wrote our standards and best practices. I created patterning for accessibility, and I ran training and wrote training for our engineers, our designers, our QA people, our other product managers, etc. So if you want, you can find me on Twitter or at GitHub. Halter's Web is my handle. And I want to start with a case study. I know a woman, her name is Henny Swan. She's a friend of mine who's also, or was also, UX director for the BBC. She's now works for the Paciello Group. Some of you may have heard of the Paciello Group. But many years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, she came on board and she was involved with designing and developing the brand new interface, a very dynamic, complex interface for TV and radio for the BBC. So right from the get-go, they were designing, they were developing with accessibility in mind. They were thinking ahead of time about logical heading hierarchies, logical content. They tested both with automated testing and with manual testing. She knew that automated testing can only capture about 20% of the problems, especially the more advanced your interface is. So they did a lot of manual testing. She was very adept with screen readers. They tested with screen readers. They tested with keyboard. They rolled it out and they found out it just wasn't usable by the blind. In fact, it was probably not usable by more groups, but those who were blind were the most vocal about it. So what she did was she got a gentleman who was a screen reader user, blind since birth, and she said, okay, I'll have my screen reader going, you have your screen reader going, and we're going to go through and we're going to figure out where the disconnect is. Well, it only took seconds before she realized just how off base they were. Because first of all, And these are just some examples of the roadblocks. There was massive link overload. The page itself had over 100 links and buttons. There were duplicate links. So an image might have a link, and then the text next to the image might have a link, and they went to the same place. And also sometimes the image would use the image alt tag and describe the image, but that wouldn't really describe where the link went. So people were who were using screen readers and with keyboards were going through massive amounts of links just trying to get to where they were. Navigation tools, they were buried deep into the page rather than being the first things on the page, or rather than using landmarks, which brought them right into quote view, virtual view or audio view. Content order and link progression was mismanaged. So after you selected a category, for example, or after you selected a channel, you would have to then tab through all of the other categories or all of the other channels. Can you imagine? Sometimes now with cable, 600 channels, tab through all of them just to get to the content for the channel you had selected. Okay, that was just some of the issues. All right, and as we build more and more complex interfaces, we're not creating web pages anymore. We're creating web interfaces. And so we really need to think about how do we approach accessibility instead of just dotting I's, crossing T's, trying to be logical and testing when we are not the user with the disability, the old, we are not our customer. So how I'm going to do this is we're going to talk about understanding the assistive technologies. I'm not going to go into understanding the person with a disability because I believe you guys have already thought about that. You think about people who are blind or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, have a physical mobility, having aging in place issues, cognitive issues, people with autism. I am a neurodiverse individual myself. So lean, clean, easy to take in content is very important for me, or smoke starts to billow out of the top of my head. So, but we're not going to go there. Instead, we're going to go through understanding the assistive technologies themselves. What are the tools that these people use? And how do we approach development through the understanding of the tools? Then we're going to go through about 6 examples of different interface patterns that we might need to deal with, from lesser to more complex. And we're going to talk about how do we think in terms of what the person needs before we put proverbial pen to coding paper. And then we're going to talk about, right at the very end, empowering you, the developer, to have that voice that's necessary in the development, the design process, and even before. So let's talk about assistive technologies. You might hear me say AT or ATs, okay? And we all think of screen readers, or we think of hearing aids, or we think of our keyboard. We're going to look at some of those. We're not really going to, in this one, focus on hearing, not because it's not important, but because a lot of what we're doing with interfaces is more about content and content overload and content understanding versus closed captioning and things like that. That's all important, but it just is kind of outside the scope of what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to start with a switch button. Now this gentleman has a single switch button, but often you will have configurations with 2 switch buttons, 3, 4 switch buttons. These switch buttons are almost like thinking of a tab key or a return key, okay? So you've got to think about focus management. You've got to figure out tab and enter management on your site. We need to think about focus states versus active states. When the person uses their switch to get to a navigation device, does the look change so now that they know it's focused? Or, that should be different from the active state, things like that. We need to think about timeout management. Someone using a switch button, as you can imagine, especially if they're typing their address, they are typing with one letter at a time. They have to find the letter, find the number, select it with the switch button, then go on to the next letter. So are we giving them an ability, if they run out of time, to preemptively, they're able to continue the time before we time them out? Okay. Sip and puff joystick, that's kind of also a switch device where it's using air pressure, but it also often has a joystick component where this tube is being articulated by the tongue, so they may see a cursor moving around their screen. An example might be if they sip, that might be enter, and if they puff, that might be tab, so they might tab, 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 and then to enter to engage that actionable. Again, we need to think about hover states because they're moving their cursor around with something that does not have a lot of fine motor movement since they're using their mouth. And so we've got to really be sure that hovering is very obvious. They know where they are. Okay. And again, you can imagine timeout management with that. Braille keyboard. People need to be able to jump paragraph to paragraph, not one long paragraph with lots of BRs, heading to heading. Think about your reading order, your navigation management and efficiency. They're reading with their fingers now. They're not hearing, they're reading with their fingers. Now we're back to our screen readers. Again, paragraphs and headings, reading order, navigation management and efficiency. Voice control. This is where your voice is your mouse. You're going to be speaking what that button or what that link says. So first of all, your labeling needs to be unique, because if you have 3 click me's and the person says, or click here's and the person says click here, which one of the 3? Okay. Your labels need to be verbatim. So if it says go to checkout, and that's what the ARIA label says, but the image says check out now, and the person using their voice says check out now, but the ARIA label was go to checkout, they'll never be able to engage that button. Again, focus and action indicators are very important. Screen magnification, whether that's the command plus, which is actually not used a lot. We think of, they can just command plus. Someone who's got a visual disability already has settings that allow for magnification. They're not going to be command plusing everything. Their operating system is already set for magnification. They may also be using kind of a sliding magnification method with severe magnification, as this woman is doing here. So what do we need? We need to think about spatial logic, grouping content into certain quanta that they can spend time in without having to zigzag all over the page looking for things that change, looking for the rest of the information. Collapsible content that allows them to zero in only on the content, and if they have to scroll around, everything else is collapsed so they're not whiz banging here, there, and everywhere. And relative sizing, so whenever possible, as they increase their screen magnification, the sizing isn't locked in place. So now they don't have a table now that's 3 feet across, proverbially speaking, or 6 feet across, that scroll. Maybe that table grows and shrinks with the magnification so that they can see what they need to see without, traveling all the way to the right, all the way to the left, up, off screen, etc. Okay? So we're going to learn through examples. I've got about 6 examples. We're going to go through some of them very quickly. I think what I'm going to do for time's sake is we're going to look at all of the examples with the screen reader. Then we're going to go back and we're going to visit them. Okay? Screen reader, remember, that's only one assistive technology, but it's one that we often think of. And screen reader and keyboard, we think about that. And some of you may know that there's a screen reader, but never, you can vision a switch button, because if you can just think of hitting tab and enter maybe, but you may not actually have heard, what does something sound like in a screen reader? So we're going to go through and we're going to look at 5 examples, not 6. Okay, I thought I had 6. So this is a single page application. I usually, by the way, I'm on a Mac now, so I'm going to be using VoiceOver. VoiceOver for Mac, not a very good product. I do understand, though, that we have to work with Macs and with VoiceOver, but the majority of people using screen readers, etc., are actually on PCs because they're so annoyed with what Mac has done and just not done as far as moving their screen reader forward. All right, so let's take a listen very quickly and see if you can hear, try to pick up some things that you probably wouldn't have expected. Okay, so let me turn on.
Welcome to VoiceOver.
Okay.
VoiceOver on Safari. When new link. Step 2. Previous button. Next button.
By the way, when you heard link, it just says link step 1. I didn't forget about the labeling.
You are currently
I just
on a button
moved through.
inside of web
So
content.
hit
To click this button, press Control Option Space. To exit this web area, press Control Option Shift up arrow. New page content has been loaded. New page content has been loaded.
Okay, I'm just going to use my mouse. It's just faster.
New page content has been loaded. Go back, sidebar button. Focusing on a container div. NVDA has a bug wherein a container's contents aren't read if the control that triggers the focus is a descendant of the container receiving focus.
I'm going to close
VoiceOver
this
off.
for a moment. But you'll notice I went to the next page and it started reading the content. So there are different ways we're going to be talking about focus management and how to either let someone know that content has changed or have them start reading the new content. So you saw both of those there. Accessible dialog boxes. Let me turn this back on.
Welcome to VoiceOver.
Okay. I'm going to just use my
VoiceOver
mouth
on
here.
Safari. Accessible. Close modal window. Welcome to the modal window. Lorem ipsum dolor met. Conceptor de piscising elid. A liquid launch modal window example button. Go back button. Previous button.
Sorry. Wanted to move
Accessible
on.
tables. Web content.
We're going to go to tables.
Main.
And I'm going to go right to the table using my VoiceOver collection of control option. I'm going to use my Command T.
Who likes what flavors? Table 4 columns, 5 rows. Main, name, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. Row 2 Sally, row 3 vanilla, yes. Column 3, row 2 Sally, row 3 George, yes. Chocolate, no. Column 2.
And I want to remember what that row was for, so I'm going to just do this. Whoops.
George.
Okay, so I can remember the row, etc. All right, so there's a lot of triangulation of data there. Let's go to the date picker.
1/1/ January 1st, 2020. Choose date, edit text. 2/1.
Okay.
2021.
I've been able to type in here. Wasn't forced to just use a date picker because I might need to use my voice to just
type in format of M. Choose date using the date picker button.
Okay. And
link. Lorem ipsum.
Sorry.
Choose date using Saturday, the 2nd of January, 2021. But
and
Saturday,
use
the 9th
arrowing.
of Friday, the 8th of Thursday, the 7th of January. Keyboard shortcuts. Collapsed button. Keyboard shortcuts. Expanded button. Okay. Close date picker button. January main. Reaction link. View the full library of accessibility solution. Choose date using the date picker button.
Right. So, by the way, I want to show you something. One other thing. Okay, so
Link.
let's go
Lorem ipsum.
to
1/1/2021.
sorry about that, guys.
Insertion at end of text. Link. Choose date 1/1/2.
Oh, you see, I'm
Tuesday
having
using the date
some
picker button.
issue
Friday,
here.
the
Oh, there
1st
we
of
go.
January,
Sorry about that.
2021 button. Web application.
You'll see it's a little clunky. Again, part of it's me because I rarely use VoiceOver.
You are
But
currently on a
part
button.
of it
To click
is
this button, press Control Option Space.
part of it is the fact that date pickers, autocompletes don't work amazingly well in VoiceOver. These are much more straightforward in NVDA or JAWS, etc. But you'll notice this looks like a table, but it doesn't hear, you don't hear rows or columns.
Friday, the 8th of January, 2021 button. Thursday, the 7th of January, 2021 button.
And then I'm going to show you something about
keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts. Thursday, the 7th, close date picker button. Drag date picker.
Okay.
Use spacebar to grab.
We're used to being able to click and drag a date picker or something like this around. What about the person who doesn't use a mouse? So
you are currently on a group inside of web content. Close date picker button. Close date picker button. January 2021 new line, new line, new line, new line.
So you'll see that you are able to
close date picker button.
To move around.
VoiceOver off.
Move the item around without having to just click and drag. Now you'll hear that, you know, it was reading some background while it was moving. We can't help that. That is a VoiceOver bug. There are a tremendous amount of VoiceOver bugs. You're going to see a couple other ones. Remember not to, unless it makes things impossible, do not feel that you have to work around bugs. Let them know about the bugs, but it's Apple's responsibility, it's JAWS and NVDA's responsibility to fix those things. So one more, accessible autocomplete. Oops.
Welcome to VoiceOver.
Okay, so we're just going to go
VoiceOver, apricot, no search results. Results are available. Keyboard users, use up and down, apple, avocado, banana, cucumber, eggplant, kiwi,
it's back to there,
apple,
and then continue.
avocado,
you notice
banana, cucumber,
that focus remains on the input field.
eggplant,
okay?
Eggplant, insertion at end of text. Search for, edit text. Siri, toggle button.
Turn VoiceOver off. All right. By the way, play with these. If you've got a Mac, just say turn VoiceOver on, turn VoiceOver off. NVDA is free, and there are lots of YouTube videos on how to use these. So, you know, maybe take an afternoon and play with these. All right. So these are some of what we're going to look at. Sorry, I just went through them really quickly and very sloppily, but in the matter of time, I want to get through those really quickly. So we're going to look at some of the code, but before we do that, we're going to look at some of the things. Again, we don't start with the code. We don't write down, okay, this is what, you know, I need to write the code exactly like this. Let's move into it through things to consider, assistive technologies, the user, etc. Ask ourselves questions. How does a blind user know that the content has changed? Where do I send focus when the content has changed? What if I'm using single page applications in a method in which I'm showing and hiding content, not writing new content to screen? Can keyboard users or screen reader users break outside of my single page application content to the content I didn't want them to see? How do I manage that? Okay, so very quickly for that, we're going to do some things. We're going to update our title. Now, that doesn't mean that the title, you know, that's, you know, the title element in the body, doesn't mean that that gets announced, but often when someone hears that content has changed, they may call up the name of the title and listen to that again. All right, so that needs to be changed. If we're at step 2, we shouldn't still be saying step 1 in the title. Okay, remember that a user does not know the difference. They don't walk around going, oh, this is a single page application. That's what we developers and designers know it as. They just know it says another page. So announce content change, post load, don't announce it before it's gotten there. Either by focusing on the new content for large content, you can focus on that container and it'll start to read, or you can use ARIA Live if you change small content, or you can use both. As you noticed, I did both. You want to, let's say you're using a tab navigation. You will want to, with the current tab, make ARIA selected equal to true. Let's look at a couple examples of that. So our single page application, let's go back to the beginning. And let's take, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a listen to, we're going to watch the title and how that changes. Okay. And I called that when new content loads. If you guys notice, I give kind of examples of how to do things within my single page application hints and such. I just wrote directly, change the content by writing it, not hiding and showing, but we'll be talking about that later. So some simple things, but do you see how we go from our questions about how someone will use it with their assistive technology to some solutions, okay? Because what you're going to build is going to be slightly different than what someone else builds. You still want the customer to get the full experience. So you have to ask these questions first before going on to developing your page. Modals and interstitials, also known as dialogues. In fact, role equal to dialogue. As you know, role is an ARIA attribute. It's the only ARIA attribute that doesn't have ARIA dash in front of it. But one of the ARIA roles is dialogue. Okay, so what are some of the things we want to consider? How does someone close the modal? How they close it with a sip and puff switch, with their voice, with, do they have to go tabbing until they can finally get to the modal and get to its close button? What if, can they escape out? Where does the focus go when the modal opens? Where does it go when the modal closes? Is it going to go all the way back to the body and they've got to go through everything again to get to the last place they were at, as you know, via their screen reader or whatever? And how do people keep from escaping the modal? Again, if you're just hiding content, you're dimming content in the background, you're going to be using maybe an ARIA hidden along with any actionables, getting tab index of -1, so the person can't accidentally tab their way outside or listen outside by arrowing through content. All right, so how do we answer these questions? Well, let's see. On open, we're going to focus to either the first actionable button, which is usually the close button. That's usually done on a modal. If it's interstitial, where it's going to just be up for 5 seconds and then go away, then we want the focus to be on the entire interstitial. It'll start reading, okay? By using the role equal to dialogue, you're going to hear that you're in a dialogue, and then you're going to hear close button. So you know, okay, I'm in a dialogue. I'm going to move through this dialogue with my arrowing. On close, we're going to focus back to the triggering element, or if need be, back to the body, like an interstitial. They haven't really gone anywhere yet, so we'll then send focus back to the body. Escape to close, so important. Role equal dialogue, and inside we're going to use role equal document, because when role equals dialogue, dialogue is one of a few different roles that are called Why am I blanking? No, I'm blanking for the moment. But they are applications. Thank you. They're application roles. And so that person understands that they go through things not by browsing, but by going actionable to actionable. If we want them to browse, like reading content inside, then inside of the role dialog container, we're going to have a container inside of that with content, and that's going to be role equal to document. That person then can peruse content, read the content, okay? Bookends for tabbing, that allows you to tab, and when you get to the end of the last tab in modal, you in essence tab to, you don't know it as a user, but you tab into a bottom bookmark. That bottom bookmark says go to the beginning of the modal, and you have bookmarks on both ends, and they keep you in the, via tabbing, to keep you into the in the modal. So maybe you won't need to use tab index everywhere on the outside. In dimmed content, remember ARIA hidden equal to true, so that dimmed content doesn't get bled through and read. Tab index and -1, I gave us an example as a containment example for focus. All righty, we can look at that very quickly here with dialog boxes, right? So here is my overarching div. It has role of dialogue, okay? ARIA hidden false, but when I close it, ARIA hidden is true, okay? So we don't want them to hear modal content when it's not there. Same kind of in the opposite, we don't want them to hear dimmable content. So we want that content up here. See, right now, the modal windows ARIA hidden is false, and the page wrappers ARIA hidden is true, and that would go vice versa. You'll notice focus management, back to the thing that launched it, to the close button, excuse me, or you could put it to the entire focus to the entire modal window or interstitial. Again, see how there are different ways that are all correct, but there are a lot of ways that are incorrect. So you need to think, make those questions ahead of time, and then allow those questions about the user experience to then drive how you develop. You'll notice in here, I have a role of document. By the way, here are my bookends. I've got a top and a bottom bookend. You can reverse engineer this to figure out why there are also articles on it. And here's our role document, because we want them to be able to peruse. We want them to use arrowing, just to even go line by line or page by line by line, or even word by word, rather than forcing, telling them the arrowing is only for actionable elements. Okay. I know I'm going through real fast, but it's more the idea of asking the questions and then finding the accessible solution to that question. I need to just say, because we're starting to look at ARIA, ARIA does not change action. So action still needs to be driven by JavaScript. ARIA tells the assistive technology certain things about the content. Okay, it's about the content, not driving how a content will work. Okay, so you need to marry ARIA and your JavaScript so that they reflect one another. Okay. Oh, right. Accessible tables. I'm sure you guys deal with tables a lot. Tables is about triangulating data, okay? So some of the things that we need to think of are that, gosh, we need to make sure there's a triangulation relationship. There's a data and heading relationship, okay? We need to title that table so someone can jump into the table doesn't just end up in, you know, Sally chocolate. Yes. What does that mean? Does that mean she's allergic to chocolate, or does that mean chocolate's her favorite flavor? So we need to title our table. We need to think about column and table widths. We spoke about that before with magnification. And then what the table is not, okay? So a table is not just headings. With a different table, that's just data, because you lose that triangulated relationship. And I shouldn't have to say this, but it's amazing that sometimes I do. Table is not layout. It's not for layout, okay? A screen reader and other assistive technologies see that they're in a table because they get that information. And they know how to navigate accordingly. And if you break that or use it in a way that's not complementary to that, you can end up with problems. So data tables are actually simple. In fact, the last one, KISS, keep it simple, silly. That's the key to data tables. They're simple, keep them simple. If they're getting too complex, it might be time for another table. So use captions to title your table. You can have headings within the captions, but not vice versa. Caption also should be the first element in your table. When you're creating your THs, you need to use your scope to identify, is that heading defining the column or defining the row? So scope equal row or scope equal call. Relative sizing, I love using call group and call when I am doing overarching table and columnal and row styling. Never use row span. Screen readers just don't know what to do with a row span. So they'll never get the information correct. And never nest tables. Again, you're losing the relationship. Now you got a relationship within a relationship, and screen readers don't know what to do with that. So, so very quickly for that, tables. I wrote this code sample right below. Boy, look at how simple it is, okay? And no matter how convoluted you think that table is, it can be broken down to very simple tables. It just kind of takes a little bit of whiteboarding ahead of time. Often you'll have things where the table triangulation changes halfway through the table, and you're like, oh, do I need to nest? But I was told I can't nest, so what do I do? Well, maybe it's actually not one big table where triangulation or information changes, but rather maybe 2 or 3 tables that just have zero padding or zero margin between them. So visually it looks like one particular widget or layout, but we know, and the person who's trying to go through it only with hearing can hear that these are separate tables, and they can easily jump to them and get their own triangulated information that fits that particular table. Okay. So, oops. Then, yeah, and then date pickers. Okay. Let that user type the date. Boy, that is so important. Don't force them to use a date picker. There are a lot of reasons, including, like I said, voice commands, a Dragon Naturally Speaking, where your voice is your mouse, and your voice is your keyboard. So let them type the date. Let the screen read efficiently. Okay, it looks like a table, and you're going to see I actually used a table semantically, but I redefined the table in certain ways for screen readers so that they don't have to hear column 5, row 1, etc. And it's really efficient. This is when we're getting ARIA heavy, okay? Is this an application or is it not an application? We have to ask those questions. What is the keyboard interaction going to be like? Can I move that calendar out of the way if I'm not using a mouse and I can't click and drag? Oh, we'll talk about later about can I trust open source. So what are we going to do? See, now there's more to think about. The semantics of using table, we'll talk about that. Using role application in the table container or around the table container. Changing table ARIA roles to presentation and button for the cells. Arrowing through the cells. Expanded keyboard navigation, so people can do some quick keys to get around faster. Date label semantics and keyboard dragging, using draggable equal to true and ARIA grab. So draggable is just a regular attribute, but you're pairing that with ARIA grabbed. All right, so for this, see where we are. For this, you can see as I move around the table, I'm going to open up this first row. I'm going to choose a date. Whoops, let's go up to the first one. I want to show you guys. Watch how the information in the table data cells to the right change, okay? You can see them, whoops, you can see them changing. Class is changing, but also you'll see there's a roving ID, okay? Is that right, roving ID? No, actually, I don't think I use a roving ID for this. I think I use roving ID for the next one. Look at the fact that we have wrapped the table in a div with role equal to application. We have not done that for the table. Too many reasons why that I won't go into here, but we've used table because of visual semantics. Most of us see this as triangulated data, but we don't want the screen reader user to be bogged down with triangulated row column data. So we have changed role equal to presentation. That means any table or table-like element will be presentation based, but like in this, the heading is not a caption, will be presentation based, but the heading itself can still be heard as a heading because H2 is not a table element. Here are call groups that I use for styling. In my T body, you'll notice that I use ARIA labels to give a conversational method. That's why you were hearing Monday, 1 March 2021. Because the person just wants to know, what button am I on? Is this the date I want? Okay. And of course, then when you, and then keyboard shortcuts. All right, I can read these and find out what I can, how I can get through things faster. I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back here. And as you saw before, I was able to hit spacebar, and now I'm moving. See how it works nicer when the screen reader isn't running? Okay, it was getting a little wonky when the screen reader was running. Again, thank you, Mac OS developers. And then I can hit return to set it, and now as I'm moving my mouse around, it's not engaging and moving the date picker anymore. And so that's that. Let's go into accessible autocomplete, because that's probably our heaviest when it comes to ARIA. Again, I'm not trying to tell you all how to. There's a lot of complexity here. I'm trying to tell you how to think, okay? Then you can go and you can do this research and reverse engineer some of these things. So I can start typing, and then I can start arrowing through, and I go back to the input field, but you'll notice the input field never changes focus. It's just a visual focus to us, and an audio focus, or an audio, not focus, a visual focus to us, an audio announcement, where they said banana, cucumber, eggplant. How were they announcing these? Not because focus had changed, but because I was using a roving ID. So let's take a look at some of this roving ID. Can you see, first, see the ID? Selected option moves up or down based on to different list item, okay? This is helping us with two things in the master, okay? This is the owner. This input field is the owner. So it has an ARIA described by, which is some just how-tos, but where do we really want to look? ARIA owns, it owns the results, okay? It owns this unordered list, even though they're not hierarchical in nature as far as HTML is concerned. It has ARIA expanded is true. That ARIA expanded is on the triggerer, not on the list itself. It's saying, I own the list and I have expanded it. Okay. Where was that thing about? I'm not finding it. Yeah. Oh, ARIA active descendant, I think. All right, let's try that. Okay, do you see ARIA active descendant is saying selected option? So the screen reader knows to announce what is down here on the ID, which has selected option up within the input field. I'm also using some ARIA Live to say 3 options available, no options available, etc. Lots of complexity. Whoops. So that's our autocomplete. So we're thinking about focus management. We're thinking about keyboard interaction. We're thinking about ARIA heavy lifting. And we'll talk again about trust open source in the last minute or two. But by the way, combo box is how it's known in ARIA language, by the way. So focus remains on the element. We're considering our arrow, our arrow buttons, our escape, our enter, and our tab. Lots and lots of ARIA. And this can morph a bit based on what we're trying to do. A lot is going to be set in stone, and a lot is we're going to have a little bit of flexibility. So we're going to be using our autocomplete and our ARIA autocomplete. We're turning autocomplete off, but we're turning ARIA autocomplete on by saying both. We're saying it's both inline and it's a list. Okay, so ARIA autocomplete can be none, it can be both, it can be list, or it can be inline. If it was ARIA autocomplete inline, that's very similar to the regular HTML attribute autocomplete. But we are overriding this by turning this off and manipulating our autocomplete audio information with ARIA autocomplete. ARIA owns and ARIA expanded. And where does ARIA expanded land? I've seen this ARIA expanded put so many times on the list itself instead of the triggerer, and that's wrong. 90% of the time. I'm not going to go into the side times when it is right, but 90% of the time that's wrong. It must be on the triggerer. ARIA active descendant with the roving ID, role of list box and role of option. It's almost saying this list is almost acting like the form option method, the form list box. And are using our ARIA selected and using ARIA live. Lots there, but that's where then you can go back and research. So in the next 2 minutes, and then I'm going to we'll only have a couple minutes for questions, but empowering you, the developer. First of all, move yourself up the pipeline or get your advocate, the developing director, to move you not only within design, but maybe near the tail end of ideation, because the product owners may have made decisions that are forcing functions to design that's going to be causing down the road accessible problems during development. So if you can get in before the ideation is set in stone, you can curtail some problems, and you've saved them a lot of money, okay, by nipping it in the bud. And in design, how many times do we say, well, if we did it just this, tweaked the design just this way a little bit, then we can do this coding, and this will make it more accessibly efficient or work. Open source libraries, frameworks, okay? Open source frameworks that have open source solutions and libraries of open source solutions. I don't care if it says this is autocomplete with ARIA 1.1, and we've used all these ARIA that I listed. That doesn't mean it works. We went through 6 date pickers because my method was not done in React, and they needed React, and they didn't want to build a React module. And they had us, thankfully, they came to us and said, we found these 6. These are all accessible. Tell us, these people really know what they're doing. They say all the right things. Tell us which one is the most accessible, or which one you'd like us to use. Guess what? None of those 6 were actually accessible. They were built, but they were never tested. Or they were never tested with someone who actually was blind or actually used a switch device, etc. So you got to sleuth them out. You think you found something? Test it yourself, or have QA test it, or better yet, have people in the disability community test it before you move forward. And guidance. So I'm going to share this with you, but the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative has design and development guides with patterns. Don't ask Stack Overflow. I can't tell you, it's like 80 to 90% of the time, it's developers who don't know telling developers who don't know, and it's wrong. And but instead go to the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. We are a member of that, and so we have like 50 licenses that go to different developers, so they can ask the IAAP, and they get back to you. These are users in the community. They get back to you really quick. Hey, can you take a look at this? This is something I'm trying. Tell me if you like it. Tell me if it if you know a different way. The W3C has ARIA examples. These are what I showed you. Now, you'll notice these are years old because I'm now not in that position anymore. I'm doing innovation, not patterning. So a lot has changed since then, but a lot is the same. And then Brian Garaventa works with Level Access. He's amazing. He is blind, and he writes something called WhatSock Technical Style Guide and gives a lot of great information there. All right, that was a lot to cover, but we only have a few minutes left. But any questions? I can't hear you, Scott.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. That was super helpful. And I know there are a lot of people that are really appreciating kind of the deep dive into the ARIA. So that being said, accessibility is still fairly young at Cerner. I know you've just given us a few different examples of places to research. Is there other information that you could potentially give on where to start out for those engineers who are just starting the accessibility journey? We know that ARIA, too much of it or used inappropriately could make our products less accessible. So are there some very specific examples or like good places that you really recommend in addition to other ones? So.
Well, I gave those because I thought they were amazing. I would start so that if you do a search for, and there's a link in there, if you do a search for W3C WAI, and go to the Web Accessibility Initiative homepage, you'll notice across the top there's something that says Design and Develop, and that's how to get started. Okay. In fact, it says tips for getting started with web accessibility. Okay. So before you even dive into ARIA, and there's page structure tutorials, menu tutorials, how to meet WCAG with quick reference guides. WCAG is your web content accessibility guidelines. We usually will follow AA or AAA, depending on whether you're an education or government. You would be following the more standard AAA. Yeah. But getting to know those and this WAI landing page is a great place to start.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I love the WAI's best practices page. Those are great. And just for reference, we actually follow ANAA standards for anybody listening. So maybe one more quick question. So whose responsibility is it to ensure that the accessibility is built in? Where does that start from in your perspective? Is it the engineer? Is it the afterwards? Where does that all lie?
It's got to be everyone, because what we find is if there's buy-in on the top, top level management, there's buy-in by the developers who want to do the right thing. They're excited about learning these new skills. They're proud of their work. And then the bottleneck is middle management, because they are saying, well, we don't have the budget for that because they consider it a feature, so we're going to put it in Q5.
Yeah, that's absolutely a thing. So how do you get that buy-in with that middle management part? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, those who are trying to be change agents need to let top level management tell them to they're buying in, tell them to talk about it all the time, tell them to put it into success criteria for those quarters and that year. Teach the product owners to put them into success criteria. That's a big thing.
Sure. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you again, Adina, for presenting for our International Women's Day Tech Talk. And thank you to everyone who's joined. If you do have more accessibility questions, the accessibility team does have an accessibility office hours every other Thursdays. Tomorrow from 8 a.m. CST to 11 CST. And then we also have an accessibility collaboration page where you can always go and ask questions. But again, thank you so much, Adina. We really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you.